Much. Thank you, Sam. Good morning. I want to thank Sam for inviting me and Raylene to speak today about Kansas Matters. I'm just going to do a little bit of an introduction to the book and then go through a little bit of what we have in the book, and then I'll hand it off to Raylene to do a reading of her wonderful, wonderful piece. Tom and I asked her to submit to the book, and I will say it was hard to choose which chapter we wanted from East of Liberal, so I recommend that one as well. So, back in 1992, Tom Averill published What Kansas Means to Me. And what it was sort of a literary history of Kansas, and connected his deep, deep love of Kansas with the literary history of our state. We are so fortunate in Kansas to have a deep literary history. We are abundant in writers still to this day, which is wonderful. So, What Kansas Means to Me has never gone out of print, which is remarkable for a 30-some-year-old book. The University Press of Kansas approached him about 2 years ago and said, "We'd like a revised copy. Like, would you do another book for us about Kansas?" Well, I was fortunate. Tom invited me to lunch one day. I will say that Tom and I were friendly acquaintances. We, hadn't socialized together or anything like that, but we both respected one another's work. And at that lunch, he asked me if I would collaborate with him on the new book, which was such a deep honor because I'm from Kansas. I've lived in Kansas over the course of my life, have left and then come back. But I so deeply remember What Kansas Means to Me, that his first book, because I was living in Chicago at the time. And it was a cold day in February, and I was on my lunch break from my job there, and I went to the bookstore nearby just to browse. And I was so deeply homesick, and What Kansas Means to Me, practically jumped out of the shelves at me. And so it's a book that I have adored for so many years. So to collaborate with Tom on this new updated version of what we have now, Kansas Matters, was just such a wonderful honor. So with that, Tom and I had discussions. He did not want to do another history of Kansas literature. He wanted, and I agreed with him, we wanted to publish living authors. We wanted to look at Kansas now. What does Kansas mean to us now? Some of that does mean our heritage, and some of these pieces do look back on how it has shaped our state. But then some of the stories in here are also today. What is Kansas today? We all know that Kansas is not represented well often in the larger media, and so we really wanted to push back against that and show the real Kansas. So we came up with this idea that we wanted this book to be an evocation. We wanted the emotional feeling of Kansas in this book. And so that was the underlying sort of guide star for us as we were reaching out to authors and selecting pieces. So some of these pieces have been published before, but some are very original, just written for this book. So with that, I'm going to start, and then we'll do a little preview of some of the sections and the feelings that are in the book. But first, I want to start with the very first piece that we have in here after Tom's introduction, which is Ad Astra by our current poet laureate, Tracy Brimhall, that she wrote for the governor's inauguration a few years ago. The story we tell the future will have windmills and the quiet clap of cottonwood leaves, annual festivals and old streams elbowing their way into fields that many histories ago were shallow seas. The story will be what we make of it, with our corn mazes and street corners, dirt roads and art districts, block parties and community gardens. Our chapters will be like our seasons, reliable in their surprises. The busy plots of star-baked summers and the slow conclusion of winter with its catalog of snowflakes. In the story we are writing into the future, there are kids biking through the neighborhood and a great blue heron at the pond hunting in its own shadow. The story has the people of the wind and people of the wandering, the rooted and the transplanted. What comes next, we can almost see. Rain's brief signature on the sidewalk and a chevron of migrating geese breaking up the wide open sky. A story where wind romances a dandelion and bees lounge at their favorite goldenrod saloons. The story we are writing to the future has facts, like how a sunflower's face is a union of individual seeds all leading towards the sun together. This story grows. It changes with each day. It's full of possibilities, like how, before dawn ripens the horizon, the night sky dreams one more story for the Library of Stars. Whew, that one gives me goosebumps still. I've read it so many times. So here's our cover by the wonderful Angie Pickman, a Kansas artist. We were just so delighted that she agreed to do the art for the cover of the book. We also have Kevin Young is the poetry editor for the New Yorker magazine. Until recently, he was director of the African American Museum for the Smithsonian in Washington, and he is from Topeka. So we have his poem about Nicodemus, which is a very moving series about the settlers who moved to Nicodemus. And then we also have a memoir piece by Armando Menares, who is a Mexican-American artist living in Wichita. He came at 15 as an undocumented immigrant and lived for many years in Ulysses and Dodge City. And he writes a little bit about his relationship. Does anybody know La Salsa Man in Dodge City? It was, I think, a gift from Dennis Hopper of all people. But he writes a pretty interesting piece about his relationship with this public artwork in Dodge. We have a section called Elemental Landscapes. That, of course, features bison. Just the great, as Megan Kaminsky in her poem about bison writes, calls them bird kings of the prairie. And Tom does a wonderful section about tornadoes, an essay about tornadoes in Kansas literature. As you can imagine, they're everywhere. Even though I believe Georgia has more tornadoes than Kansas does, we certainly are known for our tornadoes. Michael Kleber Diggs is a poet and writer who now lives in Minneapolis. He, in recent years, his poetry career has really taken off. He's won many, many awards, but he grew up mostly in Wichita and has a beautiful, beautiful piece about connecting to the Kansas landscape after the tragic death of his father. His grandparents took in he and his twin brother, and they spent a lot of times connecting over fishing with his grandfather, and it's a beautiful, beautiful essay. Interesting, our other voice from Liberal, Raylene, but also Rachel Coleman, who grew up in Mineola, now lives in Liberal. Her father is from India, and she grew up in the 70s as, an Indian American child in this small town. Her mother's Mennonite, and her piece is a really fascinating essay about her mother trying to find the food needed to cook Indian food while shopping in Dodge City in the 1970s. And then how just a community comes together. Anyway, I used Jungle Book to illustrate her piece because She, was fascinated by her father's stories of India that he had shared. And then sometime in the early 80s, a couple from India bought the local hotel and they became friends, family friends. And so then when her middle school or high school decided to put on the Jungle Book for the school play that year, Rachel was like, "This is my moment." And Dasha was able to share clothes from India for her, and just a wonderful coming of age story in rural Kansas.
And Leslie, before you get away, B.H. Fairchild also
Yes.
lived in Maple.
You're right.
And he's a fabulous poet.
I
I mean,
agree.
but when I began my teaching career, I was so proud that there was a poet of this renown from Liberal that it gave me energy to write, because this guy is amazing and has been anthologized in the books I taught about poetry for years. So
Yeah.
I had to get that in for Liberal.
I am very glad you did. Would you like to read his poem?
I can. This isn't my favorite, but I
Picked the wrong one.
did not. This is just not. I'd love to read it if you'll let me, just because I'm proud of him. I mean, he's older than I am, but this is really a beautiful poem. It's about, he gets back to Liberal, and I often hear from friends in Liberal that they had heard him. He's mostly lived in California and taught there all of his life. But his dad was a mechanic and had a mechanic shop on 54 Highway. I didn't know that's what it was when we drove by so many times in Liberal. And he's written some beautiful poems about that. This one, that Liberal has the Wizard of Oz Museum, and how many places Wamego does too, and we have too many places in Kansas who claim that. But he came back to see his mother in the home where she was living. And the poem will tell you the rest, I think. The second annual Wizard of Oz reunion in Liberal, Kansas by B.H. Fairchild. They have come once more, the small ones. They crowd around my mother and her friends at the F. Nightingale Retirement Home and sing Wizard of Oz songs like hymns, and let themselves be called munchkins by the palsied ancient ones who cling to that memory. And Dorothy, taken through the Kansas air, but cannot recall the green city or the yellow road that leads there. Mrs. Beaudry, who owned the coffee shop, cannot find her hands, and Mr. McIntyre is searching for his long dead wife and is happy finally when she calls. For these the actors sing their tunes, and for the wheelchair aged and the ones on metal walkers that clump like awkward giants through the halls. For these, the rayon flowers, and the Bible open to a text they cannot read. For these, a trip to Ozland, and a photo sent with a letter in which my mother writes, "Some children came today. They seemed so grown and fine, and reminded me of you back when." This to a man with neither courage, brain, nor heart to find his way back home again. It's beautiful. Thank you for letting me read.
Oh, thank you.
Putting Liberal back on the map.
A great town for excellent tacos too, I will say. And many other things. Another essay. So one of the few non-Kansas people that we have in the book is Ian Frazier, who writes for the New Yorker. Many of you know his work, The Great Plains, probably a book published, I think, in the 90s, just about his sort of long tour of the Great Plains and the people who live in it. This is a photo of the Starbuck fire, the massive grass fire that happened in 2017 in the Ashland area. Ian Frazier wrote just a wonderful piece about not only the devastation of the Starbuck fire, but mostly it's about the community that came around to help each other following the fire and even during the fire. So we were happy to get the rights to that one, and he was lovely to work with as well. Ranching, you can see a tiny little cow there. Flint Hills Ranching. We have Matt Perrier, who is writing about just the life of being a rancher in Greenwood County. And we also have a piece about Parsons, Kansas. Gilbert Baker, who is the creator of the Pride flag, is from Parsons. C.J. Chanavy wrote a really moving piece about women in Parsons who were trying to get Gilbert Baker. They went to high school with Gilbert, and we're trying to get him back to visit for a class reunion. And then we also have two pieces by Native American writers. One lives in Oklahoma. She is Cherokee and Kaw, and writes about what are state boundaries. Tom and I had some conversations about that. Like, lives in Oklahoma and has her whole life, but this is her land up here too. And she had grandparents who lived in Lawrence too. So they did that drive a lot as she was growing up. And we have Dennis Rogers, who some of you may know. He's the spirit dancer. Has a really interesting creative piece about why he did it, why he dances for people. And of course, you can't have a Kansas book without John Brown. But Dr. Kelly Irby at Washburn University takes a different look at John Brown and how his image and persistence says more about us than it does necessarily about the history of the man himself. Jim Hoy, we had the honor to work with Jim right before he passed. He reworked essay that he did for the Kansas History Museum in the 90s, which has maybe my favorite title in the whole book, How Kansas Gave Texas the Boot. And he asserts, and I think very rightly so, that that innovations in the cowboy boot happened here in Kansas. And with that, we have other traditions and, of course, a lot of hard work. And with that, I'm going to hand this off to Raylene. We so loved her chapter in the book, Girls on the Land. Did you want the book help?
I think I'm gonna do what you did.
Oh, okay.
It would be nice to have this.
Great.
I think I can manage that.
Right.
So yes, I'm so honored to be in this book. This is the company of many writers I have admired for a long time. And I guess I was surprised that they chose Girls on the Land, and pleasantly surprised and honored. My sister, who lives in Beatrice, desperately wanted to be here this morning because she's so much a part of that, but she couldn't make it. But I wanted to read a few snippets of that book, or of that chapter, but I wanted to first set it up a little by talking about the fact that the subtitle of East of Liberal is Notes on the Land. And everything I wrote in that book was an attempt to, I never thought of it as a memoir, though that's what it was published at. I thought of it as Notes on the Land, the story of the land I grew up on, and how all of us were shaped by that land. And I just want to read the foreword, which sets up, I think, the chapter that they chose. I have read that the Apaches believe land makes people live right. Can that be true? The Apaches also honor place as the origin of story. I know that to be true. It is said they begin and end every story it happened at. For us, it happened 3 miles east of Liberal in Corner Seward County, Kansas, bordering Beaver County, the Oklahoma Panhandle, once known as No Man's Land. My parents, a young and eager post-World War II couple, were looking for a place to farm and considered themselves unaccountably lucky in 1950 to have found a half section of sand left mostly untended since its topsoil had blown away during the 1930s catastrophe known as the Dust Bowl. The children of generations of Mennonite farmers, my parents set about bringing the land back into productivity, realizing almost immediately that the dry land would not sustain them. They accumulated a herd of Holstein milk cows and managed the dairy together for a quarter century. Purportedly, Minnow Simons, the founder of our faith, was the child of a dairy farmer. So was Georgia O'Keeffe, and so am I. So that was to give me status enough to write this book. I have to say before I go any further, and Mom, you better turn around and make a bow. My mother is on the front row today. She is going to be 100 years old in February. And this is also what the land does for you. I was always intrigued with why my parents would leave decent city jobs they had right after my daddy was out of the service and they were married to go to a place where they had nothing and say, we're going to leave our jobs in the city. They had accounting and bookkeeper jobs, pretty good jobs for them, and launch out to Southwest Kansas and the Oklahoma Panhandle. Daddy had a brother there who farmed with nothing, pregnant with me, and say, we've got to find land. Well, when I took a heritage tour to Poland and traced back 10 generations of ancestors on the land, from Holland to Moravia to Prussia for a couple of hundred years, to Russia, to the US, many of you have the same story, and then to Oklahoma, which is another country. When I traced that, I understood that this longing was a deep ancestral need for autonomy. Mom and Daddy always said, well, we didn't like what our bosses told us we had to do. For autonomy, for life on the land, a deep urge to be close to the earth and to have your hands in the soil. And that was huge for us growing up. I want to say also that the divisions of this book, East of Liberal, are the solstices and equinoxes. And I very carefully studied how the indigenous cycle of the seasons, I actually had this ancestral Puebloan seasonal calendar in front of me the whole time I wrote the book, looking at their equinoxes and solstices and how that dictated the activities of their year. You know, wild plant collecting and then garden hunting and then harvesting crops and wild plant, and how it dictated all of their celebrations, all of their rituals, in fact, their religious practice. And in my own little Mennonite church, every festival, because we were all farmers, every festival mimicked that. We had something that had first been a part of the ancestral Puebloan, and that became really important for me in shaping my understanding of our religious practice and our relationship to the land. So my book is divided: winter solstice, blessing of the seed, spring equinox, May Day, summer solstice, Lammas, autumn equinox, and All Hallows Eve. Girls on the Land comes immediately after the autumn equinox. And just to show you how I set this up, I will read that before I read a few snippets from Girls on the Land. Autumn equinox. During September, my parents began to get ready for the extended weeks of harvest time it would take to cut silage and fill the silos for winter. A much longer, slower, and more tedious harvest than cutting wheat. With the milo, Mama and Daddy cut themselves, sometimes with the aid of a neighbor. Daddy changed the header on the combine. Cutting fall milo could extend into late fall if the weather got bad or the milo was late in ripening. Compared to wheat harvest, everything had slowed to a crawl. The theme now was preparation. We moved toward the old hunter-gatherer instinct to make ready for winter, when food and warmth were not readily available. Most importantly, we prepared for the winter well-being of our dairy cattle. The church harvest festival was both literal and metaphorical, referencing both the literal harvest of crops and the biblical reminder the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. As autumn moved toward fall, we turned inward, insulating the house and barn against the winter cold, making sure the fields were ready to lie dormant under the cold of winter. I always had the sense that along with my new winter coat that would prepare me to face the cold wind on the plains, it was time for me to return to my labors, to prepare myself for some work I was surely being called to do. So the chapter, Girls on the Land, is about what my sister and I, as 50s and 60s girls, came to value on a dairy farm run by our parents, with us assisting. Where I believe we learned strength, independence, self-reliance, pride in work, autonomy, and a dependence on natural forces like wind and rain. It was a great life, a wonderful life. If somewhat confined, you don't leave a dairy farm. Even for Christmas, no one could milk our cows. They didn't know how. To go see our grandparents, my parents milked at 3 or 4 in the morning. The cows were shocked, but they obeyed. We drove 4 hours to spend some hours of Christmas Day with our grandparents in central Oklahoma, where we were all from and where they all stayed. My mom and dad just happened to find, thinking of borders, I never knew if I was from Oklahoma, where my church and all my friends were, or if I was from Kansas, because that's where we farmed and I went to school. But my friends were all in Oklahoma, except for my school friends, of course. Anyway, we would go there for Christmas Day for a few hours and return to a late milking and desperate cows. So, a couple of paragraphs from Kansas Matters. I cannot think of a girl, whether she had brothers or not, in our church who did not drive tractor for her father, haul ground, and do farm chores. We all saw our farms as family operations, and gender seemed irrelevant when work needed to be done, especially at harvest. This was probably especially true on our marginally arable land. Hired help was not an option. What we four could not do, we had to ask the help of extended family or neighbors to do. Because our operation was small, if we had 2 trucks hauling grain as my father drove the combine, Mama always drove our truck until we girls were old enough to drive into town to the elevator, delivering harvested grain. A neighbor or relative would haul the harvested grain with another truck to keep the combine going nonstop. Then Daddy would take his truck and return the borrowed services to the neighbor who had helped him. Probably learning to drive very young was one way we could prove ourselves worthy contributors on the farm. And we all wanted to be mature and responsible enough that our fathers and mothers valued our contributions. So we began driving as soon as we could see over the steering wheel of the small work tractor or the pickup. First, we sat on our father's lap while he drove around the yard, carefully observing how to start, shift, brake, and manage the switches and levers. He took the time to teach us, anticipating our help when we were old enough. Then we began to drive across the yard at the age of 6 or 8. I know you don't believe this, but it's true. Believing ourselves important and helpful if our father said, "Go get the pickup and bring it here. Can you do that?" Or Daddy might inform us that he needed to build a fence around the sedan patch, and he needed someone to drive the pickup from fence post to fence post as he walked, dug holes, and strung wire. We carted his equipment and learned to drive the panel truck. With a standard shift, we might kill the engine repeatedly until we got the hang of it, but we lived for our father's praise. Ah, that was a nice, smooth takeoff. You can imagine my bristling when I hear talk about women drivers. I was telling you, I drove long before you even had a bicycle. My sister and I drove the tractor, milked cows, ran and jumped the high jump Daddy helped us to build each spring. I was shocked to learn from other Mennonite girls that the boys in their homes got more respect than the girls. My father was very competitive and expected us to win out over every boy in our class, whether in a foot race or a history exam. His attitude instilled confidence in us. In fact, I always had the sense that my daddy, despite his dignified masculine bearing and military demeanor, was closer to his mother and sisters than to his brothers. He seemed proud, in awe of, and totally appreciative of the wide-ranging skills and competency of his wife. Years after I left the farm, I heard a Colorado park ranger speak on women in the West. She described a Southern Cheyenne woman warrior who took up her butcher knife to avenge her rage after the Sand Creek Massacre. The butcher knife was what a woman had, and in this case, she used it. In a moment of epiphany, I thought of the butcher knife as an ironic symbol, the farm woman's primary tool, although my mother says never a weapon. I have a very early image of my mother's strong hands on her butcher knife. As I sat on the kitchen floor watching her sharpen the knife on the stone edge of the bean pot she had received as a wedding present, a squat gray crockery pot with a pink rose on its front. The pot sat high atop the refrigerator, where it still sits in her home today, or did until I took it a year or two ago. Mama reached to remove the lid carefully so as not to chip it, and with the knife in her right hand set about to create a ringing twang akin to the noise created by playing a woodcutter's handsaw as she smoothed the edge of her butcher knife, alternating one side and then the other, back and forth, sharpening the knife blade against the crockery edge, long ago gone gray with metallic rubbings. My mother hated butchering chickens, and so did I, but she insisted that I help her. After she had retrieved the largest fryer from the chicken house, she grabbed the chicken by its scaly yellow legs and marched herself grimly to the old elm tree near the barn, where she hung the fryer from the hanging tree by its legs with a piece of wire that always dangled conveniently from a lower branch. Close your ears, this gets gory. Upside down and helplessly flopping from its wired feet, the chicken dangled as my mother grabbed its neck to stretch it taut, then quickly hacked off his head before she retreated a few steps, allowing the chicken to flop to its death, spurting blood and reddening its flapping wings. Mama threw the head to the dog, though she noted that in the hard times of her youth, they had cooked the head and the legs of the chicken. Next, Mama dumped the bloody fryer into a bucket of boiling water and called me to the scene to help pluck feathers. A smelly job I never got used to, nor to the smell of chicken guts on newspaper. The naked bird gutted on the drain board in the kitchen while Mama disposed of its innards. I fled this ghastly sight until the chicken was clean for frying, or maybe to help in the fine cleaning of an occasional missed pin feather after Mama had singed the naked bird. What I remember most is my mother's adept hands wielding that butcher knife. And the last passage. Girls in our community were the inheritors of a long tradition of women's lives on the land. The women who were our models were tough, but not hard. Competitive problem solvers who had known hard times long before my 1950s girlhood. Long after I left the farm, I learned the story of my favorite Sunday school teacher, a tiny, wiry woman who probably did not weigh 100 pounds. Leona lived to be 107 when she died in 2021. A woman of humor, intelligence, and grace, she was a profound influence on me. As the oldest child in her family, she had helped to save them during the Dust Bowl. Fresh out of high school with a provisional certificate to teach in the Oklahoma Panhandle during the Dirty 30s, she brought her earnings home to help the family survive, while her father took the horses to help build a bridge on Highway 83, working off the farm trying to save it for his family. Feeding themselves and their animals was an all-consuming task. They could not consider leaving the area, despite one child's illness with dust pneumonia, because they simply did not have the money to go. We could not have afforded the gasoline, she told me. Tiny Leona wore her overalls to school, hauling a 5-gallon can of water for the children to drink from and wash in. She changed to her professional clothes in the outdoor toilet before the children arrived. She cleaned acres of dust out of that school and built the coal fires in winter. School was called off for a week once when the wind blew hard for 7 consecutive days. Leona's family survived on bread, butter, eggs, and Leona's salary, while many of their neighbors left the area. Leona never got her college degree. She later married a college-educated teacher and farmer, and though she had always hoped to finish her degree, she was needed on the farm, and after marriage, she had children. She poured her heart into teaching us in Sunday school and Bible school. Women like Leona taught us to believe that farm girls had grit, were both tough and intelligent.
Wow, beautiful. I'll just read a little piece from my epilogue, which is titled An Evolution of Spirit. And what Raylene has shared with us has shown that there is a Kansas spirit that is so connected to hard work and the heritage of hard work in the land. I live not far from the Missouri border, and I can say that Kansans are a lot different than Missourians. I would say we're also quite different from Oklahoma and Nebraska even. So there is a distinct evolution or a distinct spirit of Kansas that I really love. For me, Kansas is the damp smell of the creek bed behind one of my childhood homes. The water was an offshoot of the Meridazine River that usually flows laconically through Ottawa, Kansas. But it does go wild every so often. It spills and roars through downtown, and it forces the city to close the floodgates across Main Street. It's a feat of engineering. But if this creek off the river has a name, though, I've never known it. With my younger brother, I mucked along exposed tree roots, collecting freshwater mussel shells, crawdads, frogs, or bones. In winter, we pushed on ice to watch bubbles travel underneath, or we threw rocks from the bank. Everywhere we explored, we were accompanied by a pack of mud dogs, most of them offspring from our beloved rescue Susie. This Franklin County home was a maximal space with a massive unruly garden. We had litters of barn cats and a coop of hens that were viciously guarded by two mean Rhode Island red roosters. We had great horned owls, coyotes, a bobcat, rattlesnakes, and deer were abundant. Possums would show up to chow with the dogs, which we fed out of hubcaps. It was a fecund and untamed place, alive and volatile, both inside and outside the house. But then the lean times got leaner, and my very young father rejoined the army when I was 10 years old. Suddenly, our lives of wildness were contained in apartment housing and military protocol. And when you meet new people, they ask you, "Where are you from?" My roots suddenly needed a name: Kansas. Until then, Kansas had been an abstraction, a place on the map, a concept I had never considered. But moving away forces your home's hand, and here I was discovering what Kansas, my home, means to me. Kansas gives me some of the things I love most about the world: thunderheads, the sound and smell of shoring wheat, long empty highways. If you're from here, you've been poked at, you've been called Dorothy, you've been treated like a hayseed, you've been dismissed, you've been considered ignorant, or at least too nice, whatever that means. But to me, Kansas is a litmus test of character. When I meet someone who is curious about Kansas, or one who sees the subtle beauty of this place, I tend to like them immediately. And then I go on just a little bit about all the things that I do love about Kansas. It is complicated and it's messy, and this state will knock your teeth out sometimes. But it is also a land of kindness and quiet generosity. Many of us take because we're human and we're deeply flawed, but many more of us give. The work of defining Kansas is up to us. That is why I am deeply honored that Tom invited me to co-edit this book. The writers in these pages have laid the foundation for our future. Each essay, poem, and story reveals the unexpected, or fights the assumptions, or broadens the narrative of this special place. Collected, they all show Kansas exactly how I remember it during my childhood. It's a place wild with stories, overrun with strange and unexpected creatures. Kansas is a place of discovery and heart. Thank you so much. I guess we have some in for questions. Raylene and I will sit down here or observations too.
I guess I'll kick it off with a question. The sections that you mentioned, "Oh, Give Me a Home," "Elemental Landscapes," "Deep Roots of Family and Community," and then section 4 is "Astra, Imagining Traditions." I'm wondering, what was the process for you and Thomas to come up with those divisions, and did they change over time as you were developing this?
Yeah, that's a great question, Sam. Thank you. I would say that we reached out to our writers first and had those conversations, and then we were able to sort of see some themes start to shape up. The Astra reimagining traditions, we wanted a lot of tradition in the book, and that section has an essay about basketball, I'm sorry, and the cowboy boots, but it also has a really interesting essay by Rolf Potts, who is a travel writer and moved back to Kansas because you can do any career nowadays from Kansas thanks to the internet. So it's an interesting, and we see that around the state now, and Tom and I both thought, that's probably a new tradition for Kansas. Yeah. So elemental landscapes, that was probably the hardest one to trim down because we all love to talk about the land here.
I have a question for Raylene. What is a Sudan patch?
Sudan is a grass that, I think it came from Africa, from Sudan. And for dairy cattle, Daddy would often have a plant Sudan and then need to fence that patch so that the cattle could feed there. Is Sudan grass especially rich or something? I don't know. It was maybe what would grow in southwest Kansas and the cattle pastured on it.
Okay.
Good
Thanks.
question.
Thanks.
I take some things for granted.
Yeah.
We often talked about the Sudan patch.
How large was?
I don't think a few acres.
Okay.
Mom, was it 10 acres, maybe the Sudan patch? How big was the Sudan patch? 10 acres, 20,
Probably 25.
bigger than I remember. We always had a lane. You know, I could tell driving stories all day. I could write a whole book about driving. And maybe some of you could too, but Daddy would build a lane for the cattle to the Sudan patch. And we just let them out of the pen at the dairy barn and they could walk themselves to the Sudan patch, and then we'd go and bring them back or whatever. Well, it was a lane big enough to drive Daddy's panel truck in. He had a little panel truck in before we had a bulk tank to keep the milk in, and the milk, they would come and siphon it out of the bulk tank and take it to Amarillo, where they would process our milk. We had a grade A dairy and we had to have everything very careful. Daddy would take it in 10-gallon cans originally to town. And he had a little red panel truck that he'd load those cans on and take to town every day to the local distributor. I don't know where Charlie Kulo took it, Mom, but anyway. And so one time my cousins came to visit from Oklahoma and Daddy's wanted to let me show off and be proud. And he said, why don't you go give all your cousins a ride in the panel truck? Just drive to the Sudan truck. You know, the adults wanted us kids out of there. They were talking. And so they tried to think of some fun we could do. So I was really going to show off that I could, I mean, this track, this cattle path to the lane, we called it, the lane that went to the Sudan had a right angle, you know where this is going, and it was fenced on either side. And my cousin said, really, you can drive? And they all jumped in the back of the panel truck. Why did not any of us kids die growing up? But we all jumped in they all jumped in the back of the panel truck and I took off. And I'm sure I was driving faster than Daddy ever assumed I would. Got ready to turn that right angle to go to the Sudan patch and just wiped out the whole fence. You know, just sprung it out. I don't remember what happened next, but I didn't show off after that.
I have a question about, in the book you put together. Do you address anything about I don't know how to describe it, the death of small towns in Kansas that are dying from population loss and no jobs and that kind of thing. And the memories, I say this because I just met recently with a number of classmates. And one of them had come from North Carolina back to our hometown and was lamenting what he had, he hadn't been there for 20 years and suddenly was shocked by what he saw.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering if there's any way to address that.
Yeah, we don't have anything that addresses it directly, but it certainly haunts, other parts of the book, like the Ian Fraser part about the Starbuck fire. He talks about that a little bit. And Rolf Potts, the travel writer who has moved back to rural Saline County, he talks about that also, that we need to start finding ways to attract our young people to stay in their rural communities, incentivize them. And, jobs is the big thing. So that's what he's making the case, that you can have a job in these rural communities. But no, we did talk about that. I do know that University Press I think has a book coming out that will touch on that a little bit. So, but I agree with you.
Are there any other states that do an equivalent of this that you're aware of?
Strangely, we could not find one. We did look for similar books just to see a model, if there was a model out there. Oklahoma has a collection of poetry that's all focused on Oklahoma, and Texas has, like, the Texas Quarterly did some writings across Texas, but it wasn't quite this directly addressing the state. So yes.
There's also a volume put together called Highway 99 Revisited for the Central Valley in California.
Oh,
I don't know
okay.
how you do the whole state, it's.
It's massive.
But it does do the Central Valley.
I'll have to look for that. Thank you. It's very clear. Yes.
And Nebraska has Nebraska writers
My mother was
that
hard of
are all about Nebraska.
And it's in a collection.
It's a collection of writings.
Okay. Do you happen to recall the title of that? We did look in Nebraska, but
No, I don't.
okay. I'll keep looking now that I know it's there.
Some of the contributors were, and names have decided to fly right now.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'll have to look for that. I love the grasslands, and so I would love to read that book.
Well, and Prairie Schooner for years published so
Yes.
many Nebraska writers, and they wrote a lot about Nebraska. It's out there if they haven't collected it.
Yeah.
But I want to say, I find that really interesting. I had no idea that you had looked for other states. I just sort of assumed every state did something like this. Isn't it fascinating that, I was struck when Leslie said we're rich in writers in Kansas. That's all very interesting to me, or that there would be, it would be easy enough to collect something like this. I think of course, I'm not biased, but I think it's an amazingly rich collection. People like Kevin Young and Rolf Potts and, amazing writers who are well published. And that other states don't do this, or maybe don't feel the same way about their state, or I don't know. Do we have a certain Kansas pride? I don't know. Bill and Joyce, you've just relocated. This is my husband's cousin and his wife from Fresno, California. They just relocated in Kansas. And how does that feel to be? How do Kansans behave about this state?
I don't know, you all been pretty friendly so far.
They are known to be friendly.
I think some of it is stubbornness. I think
Yeah.
that we get a lot of flack about if you're traveling and Kansas, the flyover state and all that business. Yeah. So I think that Kansans are pretty stubborn at heart, and we want to define ourselves.
And
as we
defend
should.
it. We're probably defend it. So we go write something down.
Yeah. Which reminds me, Rob Rabine is an author who grew up in Dodge City, and he has a piece in here about how he gets that Wizard of Oz jokes and all of that when he's traveling, but he's like, but when I travel, I see the same Applebee's and the same Walmart and everywhere else. Like, why is it Kansas? So
I think I was a transplant. And I grew up in New Jersey and did graduate work in California and then in Texas, and then was looking at jobs. And there was a job, somebody came down and said to me, oh, there's this really cool job. Sounds just like you. And I'm like, where? And they said, Kansas. And I'm like, is that above or below Nebraska? Literally, I had that thing of the flyover syndrome.
yeah.
It's like, And I've got cousins in New York who, I've been here, I moved here in 1978 for what turned out to be a perfect job at Washburn.
Oh, great.
I was their first woman counselor in the counseling center. And as one of them put it, well, there's this women's movement and we need one. And so I was like, fine, sign me up. I think it was, my experience with Kansas is that it's a slow seduction.
Ah,
You know what I
like
mean?
that.
It's like you don't come and it's right away. And also, I know when I flew up for this extensive interview at Washburn, I had no intentions of taking, I was a practice interview.
Yeah.
It was just gonna, you know, I'd get it out of my system. And at every point for 3 days, I'd be like, I mean, I think it was like just imagining, you know, this flatness. And I'm like, well, this isn't so bad. This isn't so, this isn't, so you have a low bar. And then it just, and then it just keeps pulling you in. Till you get to the point, I mean, I got to the point where when I drove back in North Carolina on the East Coast, it's like, you can't see anything for the damn trees.
Yeah.
You know? It's
Yeah.
you know, and it's a totally different visceral experience. That unfortunately, the cousins who have never come in 40s will ever experience.
Yeah.
Because they're in New York, and so they know that's the best,
Yeah.
you know.
We
There's an
do love
I was gonna say, there's an arrogance sometimes
Yeah.
about places, or a lack of curiosity.
Yeah.
And that's what I find here. It's like, I keep discovering,
Yeah.
We know to be humble.
huh?
We know to be humble.
Yeah.
We're too often criticized.
We do love a horizon line here. I noticed that he applauded when you mentioned
I
that.
heard that comment so many times from my friends.
Yeah. The interestingly, I was talking recently to a man who moved to Florence to work at the university, and he grew up in Long Island. His career has taken him to California and to Montana. And it's just a temporary appointment at KU. But he said, I'm gonna make a home here. And he said the difference is because in New York, you want your career to take off and you want your art to be noticed. Same in California, same in Montana. Kansas, y'all just do your art. And you don't wait to be noticed. And he said, I just love that energy.
I think in Kansas, you just write.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Do you want to say something?
Well,
Well, real quick, just let me tell you a story about the horizon.
Please.
My daughter, born and raised in Kansas, hiked the Appalachian Trail. And it's all, you know, you're under the canopy of trees for, you know, hundreds of miles. And then finally, when you get, she said, I think it's somewhere like in Virginia or something, because you start down Georgia and go, that you end up in these mountains that are bald on the top. So there's no trees on the top. And I've got a picture of her that her hiking partner took of her up where she could see the sky.
Yeah.
And she's just like this. And she said she had no idea as a Kansas girl that was such a big part of her,
Yeah.
that she needed to be able to see the big sky like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or my closest friend who said, I don't know why we paid to come see the colors. We could have just painted our windows orange and driven for hours. And I mean, it's all the same. We're used to seeing a horizon, and if we don't see it, we don't understand what's beautiful.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
I was going to tell you, an interesting perception, people from, not from Kansas have of Kansas. My wife's from the Netherlands, and one of her cousins, who's married to an Italian lady, came here to visit, first time. And their bucket list for Kansas included 2 things. One was the Victoria Church in by Hayes, and the other was Boot Hill.
Yes.
2 things they wanted to see. He said, what do you want to see? And that's what they came up with. Gosh.
Yeah.
It is amazing how people don't know about the Flint Hills.
Yeah.
It's just amazing how people don't, they just don't, they've never heard of them, they don't.
Yeah.
Well, isn't it true, a lot of Kansas don't know about things, I mean, like the Rippery Breaks, my husband brought
Yeah.
that up. One time when we were traveling to Colorado for family reunion, I go, where are the Rippery Breaks? Well, they're way up the northwest corner of the state. And, you know, I actually saw a video made by the Penners. It was a aerial flyover, and it's amazing, I mean, you can't really appreciate it even on the ground, driving through rooms.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of stuff in Kansas is remote even to us, so.
No, I agree with you. Yeah, somebody recently referred to Alma as Western Kansas to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a Kansas who said that. Well, any last thoughts?
I'm done, are you guys done?
All right.
It's called a day.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
so
you.
much.